Hi everyone. The topic that I've chosen for tonight's shiur is Machloket. And as perhaps a provocative idea, I titled it Fatal Flaw, Bloodied Weapon or Breath of Life. And I guess the reason why I had a look at it is I'm interested in Machloket. I'm interested in the different reasons why people engage in Machloket. And I wanted to understand what the classical sources said about these three different definitions, which hopefully we'll get a chance to go through tonight. Shavuot is a time of mixed emotions and mixed understandings. You know, we have a basic understanding of Shavuot. I think it's the only festival where we don't have the "they tried to kill us, we died, let's eat" paradigm. And in fact, it's kind of, yes, there's Chag HaBikurim, but it's quite godly. And therefore, I think it's quite amazing that over the past 20 years as an educator in Melbourne, I've seen Shavuot turned into the ultimate TED Fest, where people literally run around the community in the middle of the night with 5 printouts, working out their routes so that they can jump between either chasing speakers or mapping out a route so that they can maximize the amount of Torah content that they can take in. My friends who come here from overseas who live in the Northern Hemisphere are pretty impressed by the way that Aussies do Tikkun, because it's a real deal here. And for anyone who was, who grew up in Melbourne and then took a gap year in Israel and saw that in Israel it's nothing compared to Melbourne, I think we appreciate we've got a really great deal here. So what I want to have a look at tonight is a mixed understanding of Machloket. And please God, next time we get together, it's in a face-to-face venue where it can be a little bit more panim el panim. Matan Torah is a time that I think is understood in one sense as being about the unity of experience. We know that when Am Yisrael came to Har Sinai in Perek Yud Tet, Vayisu mirefidim vayavo midbar Sinai v'yachanuch b'al midbar vayichan sham Yisrael neged hahar. And Rashi, although it's not in the sheet, says vayichan instead of v'yachanu. Bnei Israel is spoken of not in the collective singular, but in the plural. And it's very strange that Vayichan implies that there was a singular that camped at the base of Har Sinai. Famously, Rashi says, Ke'ish echad, balev echad, quoting the Mechilta. And it's a really amazing idea that despite the fact that Jewish people are generally quite diverse in their opinions and called stiff-necked, not because they have neck problems, but because they're rather stubborn. It's quite amazing that this experience is defined as being something that was quite unifying. The Kuzari has a beautiful section in chapter 1, which is on the source sheet that I'm sharing above, where, for those who aren't familiar, the Kuzari is supposed to be a conversation between the Chacham and the king of the Khazars. It's available through Sefaria. The translations are also fantastic. And it's almost an early comparative religion text where this king, this Khazar, interviews different religions to try and understand what they're all about. And eventually he thinks that Judaism comes out on top. So that's nice. And in this one section, the Chaver is explaining to the Kuzari, to this the king of the Khazars, the whole uniqueness of Har Sinai. And there he says, V'hu ha'am im ma ha'eminu bema sheba bo Moshe asher hamoftim ha'ele nishar b'nafshotehem safek. So he's saying here that the Jewish people, even after all of the supernatural things that they witnessed when they were in Egypt, they still had a doubt in them. How would God speak to man? כדי שלא תהיה התחלת התורה מעצה ומחשבה מחמת אדם ואמר יתחברהו הזה ואומץ מאת אלוקים מפני שהיה רחוק הדיבור בעיניהם. So basically, God needed to do a face-to-face, because sometimes when you have mediated experiences for too long, you lose the sense of the tangible. And therefore, we needed the experience of Har Sinai, because just hearing from Moshe, no matter how impressive it was, to a certain point, they needed a face-to-face encounter. So Hashem needed the kind of experience that would completely eliminate all doubt from the Jewish people. So they got themselves ready. It's interesting because I usually daven at home. I don't daven with a minyan. And now I have 3 guys who are wandering around the house in the morning. Is it tachnun today? Are we wearing our tefillin? Are we not wearing our tefillin? Who's daven? Zman? And these are things that I'm not usually surrounded by on a daily basis. And, they were saying this morning, no tachanun. It's the shloshet yemei hagbala. And I guess as a female, the 3 days leading up to Shavuot is usually a panic of shiurim and cheesecake. It's not usually, do I say tachanun? And there's a real sense of the spiritual preparation that's echoed in that, of this preparation that came before Har Sinai. והיה זה אחר 3 ימים הקדמות אותות גדולים מקולות וברקים ורעמים. So you've got the special effects of Har Sinai, the ash שסובבה את Har Sinai. So we've got all of the noises and the smoke and the thunder and the noise. ושנראה האש ההיא 40 יום רואים אותה העם. So then the nation sees ורואים את משה בא בתוכה ויוצא ממנה. And they see Moshe go up the mountain. They see him enter this smoke, this cloud. And then critically in the underlined section there, ושמע העם הדיבור צח בעשרת הדברים. So they distinctly heard the עשרת הדברים, the 10 commandments or statements. הם אמות התורות ושורשיהם. They heard that the עשרת הדיברות, which represent the very essence of the law. ואלה עשרת הדברים ולא קיבלו ההמון מאנשים יחידות. Right? So we didn't receive them from single individuals. We didn't receive them from a representative. We only received them from Hashem. I'm leaving out the lengthy section where they have a discussion about the Jewish people not being able to cope with hearing all of it. And then this section ends with him saying, "V'saru ele hasvarot b'ma'amad hagadol hahu." So this impressiveness of directly seeing what Hashem heard and then seeing the physical copy of those words redacted. U'mashen lilvet hadibur ha'elokim min hamichtav ha'elaki shechakak aseret hadibrot ha'ele b'shnei luchot avanim yakarot. Right, so then Moshe, by divine elocution, writes out the 10 dvarim on the Aseret Hadibrot, on that precious stone, hands them to Moshe. They saw and heard the divine writing, and therefore there's this real sense of that unity of the experience that we were all there. And yet the Midrash suggests that there was a tremendous diversity as well as unity in the perception of that experience. So in source number 2, the Pesikta de Rabbi Kahana, which is an early midrash, says that because Ma'amad Har Sinai, each person had a personal encounter with Hashem, each person experienced it in a different manner depending on their spiritual level. This is an interesting one. So in source 2, Ani Hashem Elokecha. Amar Rabbi Levi nir'eh lahem hakadosh baruch hu de'ikonin hazu sheyesh lahem panim mikol makom elef bnei adam mabitim ba v'hi b'ma'abat b'chulam. So he basically, Rabbi Levi says that Matan Torah was it was like a multifaceted sculpture that when each person looked at it from a different angle, they would take away a different impression. The Torah is so profound and so deep, each person looked at it, and depending on the angle that they were looking at this sculpture, they saw something different. Kach HaKadosh Baruch Hu, כשהיה מדבר כל אחד מאחד מישראל היה אומר עמי hadavar medaber. Right, so he says, the Pesikta de Rabbi Kahana says that that's the reason why it doesn't say Ani Hashem Elokechem, it says Ani Hashem Elokecha, that each person had a personal revelation at Har Sinai. And then Rabbi Yosei said something different. Abba Rabbi Yosei ba Rabbi Chanina lefi kochan shel kol echad ve'echad haya diber medaber imo. There was this idea that depending on each individual's strength, whether that's physical strength, whether it's spiritual strength, intellectual strength, it's not clear, but whatever the case is, we have this amazing idea that depending on people's preparation, learning, intellect, John Dewey, the educational philosopher who was responsible for the Dewey Decimal System, said that we don't see through our eyes, we see through our education. A person who's studied can go through a museum, they can go through a gallery, they can learn Torah, and they're going to see such different things. And such is the case here with Pesikta de Rabbi Kahana, and also the Ketav HaKabbalah says this on the same pasuk, that depending on people's spiritual level, they took away something different from Har Sinai, which is not to say that there wasn't a unity of experience, but there was also a diversity that was inherent in there. And because we are one of those highly complex people, therefore, because there was unity as well as diversity at Har Sinai, the rest of history is Masorah and Machloket. We have a tradition that is passed on, and we also have a lot of debate about what that tradition is. So how does that work? We know that the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, which I haven't got on the sheet there, Moshe kibel Torah miSinai u'masara leYehoshua, the Zkenim, Leviim, etc., that we have this incredible transmission of the Masorah for thousands and thousands of years, and yet we have Machloket. And what is the Machloket? Let's have a look at the most classic and probably the most famous of all Machlokot that is discussed in chapter 5 in Pirkei Avot. in source number 3, Kol ha-machloket shehi l'shem shamayim sofa lehitkayem. Every dispute that is l'shem shamayim, that's for the sake of heaven, will in the end ultimately endure. V'she'ena l'shem shamayim ein sofa lehitkayem. But one that is not for the sake of heaven will not endure. Ezohi machloket shehi l'shem shamayim. So what is the machloket that is l'shem shamayim? Zo machloket Hillel v'Shammai. Right, the kind of intellectual jousting match between Hillel and Shammai. V'she'ena l'shem shamayim zo machloket Korach v'choladato. And that's the Devar Torah for Parashat Korach that we usually have, that the difference between the request of Moshe and the request of Korach was about something that was or wasn't l'shem shamayim. Now, the Bar Tenura in source 4 does a really amazing job of differentiating between the kind of argument that is and isn't l'shem shamayim, because on the surface, a lot of arguments look very valid. And he basically says in the underlined sections there that when it comes to the argument that is for the sake of heaven, hatachlit ve'hasof mevukash me'oto machloket lahasig et ha'emet. That the purpose of the machloket, the deep motivation, is because the people who are arguing want to reveal and arrive at the halachic truth. Whereas the argument that is not l'shem shamayim, tachlit she'nirtzeh hi bakashat hasara ve'ahava hanitzuach. Right, those whose arguments that are not l'shem shamayim, the purpose is power, the attempt at power, and some kind of conflict and contention. And that's basically the difference. So if we look at the 3 options in the heading of the shiur, we can take care of bloodied weapon. We're not talking about that one tonight. That's not the legitimate machloket. That's the bloodied weapon is the machloket lo l'shem shamayim. That's the one that's about power and conflict. We can set that aside. I'd like to focus on the other machloket. The question is, the machloket that is shem shamayim, if there's people who are arguing because they're not sure or the truth is not known, and therefore there needs to be argument about what is correct. Is this tameh? Is this tahor? Is it kosher? Is it not kosher? Can they get married? Is he dead? Right? If these things aren't known, is that good or is that bad? When we look at the heading of the shiur, is it a fatal flaw? Is it a disaster? Is it a bad thing that for some reason we have machloket? Or is it a breath of fresh air and there's something wonderfully positive about the idea of machloket? And again, we're talking about legitimate and good machloket here. When we think about machloket, usually in terms of Talmudic and Mishnaic sources, Hillel and Shammai seem to be the classic. One thing that fascinated me though, my son, who's now almost 14, when he was 8, he turned around and asked me if we could learn Mishnah together. And thank God, before his bar mitzvah last year, we finished all of Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. Strongly recommended, 2 or 3 a night, and it's amazing what you can do in 5 years. It's not a lot of an investment per night, but it's the regularity of that does amazing, amazing things. And there's one thing that really struck us. Hillel and Shammai don't argue that much. There are other people who argue, lots of people who argue, and we felt very sorry for poor old Rabbi Yehuda, who never really got much of a shoe in most of the arguments that occurred in the Mishnah. But it's a real misconception that Hillel and Shammai actually argue and that they spent their lives locked in debate. In fact, in Pirkei Avot, in source number 5, it says there, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai kibel mi Hillel v'Shammai, hu haya omer. The amazing thing is that Yochanan ben Zakkai received the tradition that was the same tradition from Hillel and Shammai. And the tradition that Hillel, Yochanan ben Zakkai, of course, famously survived, turned the Yavna v'Chachameha. I think that Devar Torah is at every Yavna graduation that I ever went to when I was going through school. He received the same Masorah from Hillel and Shammai. And in fact, when I checked up on this, it seems that Hillel and Shammai only disputed around half a dozen sources when we're talking about major differences or things that really, really count. One of them was if 2 sisters marry 2 brothers, and the whole idea of if one does yibum and one marries the other one, whether it's a legitimate marriage or not. If a couple arrange a divorce, but then they're having second thoughts and they live together for a few more years, can they actually use that divorce document that they had written a few years before? Hilarious, right? There are certain ideas about unmarried women and single women and women who are minors. And do they have a right of refusal? And can you actually contract a marriage with a woman who's extremely young, more like a child? But what's really amazing is despite the fact that there are only a few minor issues that they disputed on, check out source number 6. It's an amazing idea. The Talmud Bavli Masechet Yevamot says, "Lo nimneu bet Shammai milistan nashir mi bet Hillel, V'lo Beit Hillel mi Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel married they married into one another's families. So you kind of think that they're arguing in the Beit Midrash, but then their kids married one another and they married into one another's families. Even though they disputed one another's halakha, they didn't regard one another's children as illegitimate because of the piskei halakha that would have altered their status. If one of them actually ruled that a woman was not allowed to marry a certain person, and their academic rabbinic opponent said that, in fact, they could, how could they marry into one another's families? The Gemara explains, and it says there, "Lelamdecha shechiba v'reut nohagim ze bazeh lekayem ma she'amar ha'emet v'ashalom ha'avevu." Why? They practiced affection, they practiced camaraderie between them to fulfill what it says in Zechariah, love truth and love peace. Meaning that they could joust in the Bet Midrash, but walk out as very, very warm and affectionate friends. And in fact, if they argued in the Beit Midrash and their children were married to one another, most likely they met over the Shabbat table as well. So if the trouble doesn't begin with Hillel and Shammai, where does the trouble actually begin? It's actually Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai. Let's have a look at the first source. So source number 7. משרבו תלמידי שמאי והלל שלא שימשו כל צורכן רבו מחלוקת ישראל ונעשית תורה כשתי תורות. So what's happened? Hillel and Shammai had a few minor matters, but they were still able to get along peaceably and respect one another's viewpoints. But when the students of Shammai and Hillel, interesting that the order's flipped around here, didn't lo shimshu kol tzorchan, right? When they didn't serve their rabbis or learn carefully enough and embrace the Masorah to the level of mastery of Hillel and Shammai, at that point, the Torah became kishtei Torot, right? It became as if there were two Torahs completely. Is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? Is this a fatal idea? Is this a devastating idea that the Torah wasn't being learned, and because it wasn't being learned, they weren't sure what the halacha was and they were guessing and they were arguing? Or is this a wonderful thing and it's vital and it's important? And these are really, really important fundamental Jewish ideas. The question, I guess, is if someone says has an opinion that is rejected, right? What happens to the accepted opinion? What's the status of the rejected opinion? What are the implications for Masorah and the tradition that's passed on? And how do we know they got it right? How do we know that if there's arguments, that what we're keeping today is actually the real deal? I know that in Fiddler on the Roof, the question that when Tevi turns around, he's right and he's right. How can they both be right? You're also right. But it doesn't work if you're talking about Yom Kippur, if you're talking about Kashrut, if you're talking about Shabbat or Jewish identity. These things are really serious. So, unsurprisingly, the basis of Machloket, there's a bit of a Machloket about where it comes from, and the schools of thought divide into two. There's Rambam on one side, and then there's pretty much everyone else on the other side. The Geonim, so Sadja Gaon, etc., are of the view that the schools of Hillel and Shammai forgot. Rab Sadja Gaon is of the belief that the oral Torah was received at Har Sinai, so everything came from Har Sinai. Moshe received every detail of observance and belief that any Jew would ever need to know. You come up with a chidush, it was at Har Sinai, and therefore all of the debates in the Mishnah and the Talmud are attempts to recover what was originally known and at some point, due to lack of effort, was lost. That's that viewpoint. The opposing viewpoint, maintained by Rambam, is that there's no forgetting, that we have a very strong Masorah. We have a clear sense of where we are, who we are, where we're coming from. But he maintains that at Har Sinai, only the principles, the general ideas were given to Moshe, as well as the rules by which Jews in later history would derive and create laws. So if you want to have a look just before Psukei Zimra and Shacharit, there are the 13 hermeneutical principles that allow us to derive and understand law, the Yud Gimel Midot Shehatorah Nidreshet Bahem. So he maintains that that was given, as well as the main mitzvot, and that all rules that were later decided have roots, so conceptual roots at Har Sinai, but they hadn't been specified at Har Sinai. And therefore, there's no debate in the Mishnah and the Gemara about Halacha Moshe Sinai, Rambam says the only debate is about matters that had never been considered before, and therefore all the debates, according to Rambam, in the Mishnah and the Gemara are genuine creativity in advancing and expanding the oral Torah. Now, it would be nice if the Gemara and if someone gave us a definitive answer as to who's right, Rambam or the Geonim, but I don't know whether it's frustrating or whether it's wonderful, but both of the viewpoints are supported by the Gemara. So let's have a look at a couple of those viewpoints and see if we can make sense of this a little bit further. So we're going to now look at Talmud Bavli in Masechet Sanhedrin. It's source number 8, and this is the Gemara that supports the Geonic position. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yosei mitchila lo hayu marbin machloket b'Yisrael. So it's taught in a Breita by Rabbi Yosei that initially there was no machloket in Israel. What happened when people had a question about something that they couldn't answer? Ela bet din shel 71 yoshvim b'lishkat הגזית, ושני בתי דינין של 23 אחד יושב על פתח הר הבית, ואחד יושב על פתח החזרה, ושאר בתי דינין של 10 ו30 יושבים בכל עיירות ישראל. So what happened? Pretty much like the justice system around the world, where you have the high court, the highest court in the land in the capital city, and then you have lower ranking courts going down to the magistrate courts. In the same kind of way, there would be in all major cities that were large enough cities, there would be courts of 23 judges, then they would have higher ones in surrounding cities, and eventually you go up to the Sanhedrin of 71 that sat in the Beit HaMikdash and paskined on things that couldn't be paskined on in lower courts. So what would happen? So if someone had a question, they would go to the Beit Din in their city. What happened? Im sham'u amru lahem. Isn't that interesting? So Rambam's way, when he wants to refer to halacha, he says mipi hashmu'ah. Now it's interesting. In modern Hebrew, shmu'ah is a rumor, right? Mipi hashmu'ah is his code for Torah sheba'al peh. Shmu'ah, imhem sham'u. Right? So if they knew it because they'd received it as an oral tradition, Amrulahen. So a little old farmer, his tree falls over and he's not sure, it comes completely uproots itself and he's like, my God, do I have to start keeping Orla again if I put my tree back in the ground after a storm? He goes to the local Beit Din and they say, you know, we have absolutely no idea. Such a thing has never happened before. So what happens in that case? If they know the answer, they tell him. If not, they send him to the next city. Im shamru amrulahem, the imlav, ba'in leyadam, lezeh she'al petach har habayit. Right, so then they go to the third highest one, and they go to the one that's at the opening of Temple Mount. Ve'im shamu, amru. Ve'im lav, balazeh she'al petach ha'azara. If not, then they came to the court that was at the entrance of the temple. You'd have chachamim who were wandering around there. Ve'omer, kach darashti, kach darshu chaverai, kach lamadati, v'kach lamdu chaverai. So whichever elder was there would talk to them, and they would say, the colleague, they would chat amongst one another, and they would say, this is what I was mafarish, and I was mafarish. If you look at the beginning of Masechet Sanhedrin, it's quite beautiful, the way they set up the Sanhedrin. They actually had the lowest ranking people speak first. So they had a chance to say something so they weren't intimidated. And everyone could see one another. The seating arrangement's very clever. Every classroom teacher should have a look at the way the Sanhedrin was set up. It's absolutely brilliant for getting people to actually open up and talk. It's brilliant. Ve'im shamu amru lahem. Ve'im lov elu ve'elu ba'in lalishkat hagazit l'shem sheyoshvim matmid al shachar ad tamid shel bein ha'arbaim. So if none of the courts in the land were able to help them with this obscure question, then they would go to the chamber of the hewn stone, the lishkat hagazit, where the Sanhedrin convened and used to sit there for the whole time that the Beit HaMikdash was open. V'nishala shala b'fnehem im sham'u amru lahem ve'im lav omdim leminyan. And in this case, minyan is a democratic vote. So if there were abundance of different theories about what could be potentially the answer, then they used democracy to work out what the answer was. We know from Devarim, Lefi harabim lahatot, we do go according to the majority. Rabu metamim tamu, Rabu metaharim taharu. So the judges would deem the question, whether it was Tameh or Tahar or whatever it happened to be, and whichever the democratic majority was, that was the answer. No more Machloket. There was no Machloket in Israel before Bet, Shammai, and Hillel, says the Gemara here, because all matters appeared before the Sanhedrin. all matters were resolved, and the normative position was the one that was simply the basis of a vote if a clear Masorah had not emerged from Har Sinai. So in the final lines of that Gemara there, Mishirabu Talmidei Shammai v'Hillel shelo shimshu kol tzarcham. This is what we saw before, that when they didn't attend to their masters and their learning to that requisite degree, what happened? Rabu Machloket b'Yisrael v'naset Torah k'shtei Torot. Right? Dispute proliferated. Why? Well, they didn't know, they were guessing, they weren't sure, or they thought theirs was correct, and therefore we had this Machloket. That's the Gaonic, that reflects the Gaonic position. But what about Rambam's opinion? And this is a beautiful source here, in source number 9. Sorry, I'll just scroll up. This I have not done on Shavuot before. So source number 9. Amru Rabbi Abba Amar Shmuel. Shalosh shanim lichleku bet Shammai v'bet Hillel. Bet Hillel and Shammai were locked into a 3-year dispute. Halalu omrim halacha kaminuto. Right, so there was an argument. We believe that the halacha is with us. These ones believe the halacha is with them. And finally, on the divine PA, Yatsa bat kol ve'amra, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim. Right, God is probably getting very bored of listening to these people fighting and says, Elu, his argument, ve'elu, and their argument, divrei Elohim chayim. They are the words of the living God. Halacha kabet Hillel. Just that last line in there. But, we're going to paskin like Hillel, even though. Now, what does this Gemara suggest? Right, he's right and he's right. Divrei Elohim chayim. They're both legitimate, but, we do need to go with one opinion, so we'll go with Hillel. Why with Hillel? The Gemara continues. V'ki me'achar she'elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim mipnei ma zachu bet Hillel likboa halacha kamotan. Right, so if both of the opinions were equally legitimate, then why are we going with Hillel? Why? Mipnei shenochim ve'aluvim hayu v'shonim divreihem v'divrei bet Shammai v'lo od ele shemaktivim divrei bet Shammai l'divreihen. Because they were agreeable and they were forbearing. They showed restraint when they were insulted, and when they taught halacha, they always presented Shammai's opinion before they presented their own one. Okay, sounds nice. But I don't think anyone that I know would go to a medical specialist or would seek out a lawyer because they're a nice guy as the main criteria. You want to know your surgeon's not going to chop you up in the wrong place. You want to know that your lawyer's going to win you the case. We're going to go with their halacha because they're nice. I mean, it's always nice to have an advantage to have a rab who's nice, but you really want to know that they know what they're doing. So what is this idea here that they were chosen because they were nice guys? Right, it could be a deal breaker, but it's a very, very strange idea. And how do we reconcile this Gemara that we looked at in source 9 with number 8 that said there was Machloket because they had the Masorah, but they lost it? Okay. Source number 10 is long. I'm going to paraphrase the first section, and then we're going to have a look at the second section. This is from Rambam's commentary on the Mishnah. By the way, he published it at age 25, 26, during the time that his family were on the run between Cordoba, Fez, Israel, and Egypt. So he had a really impressive run, and at a very young age was putting out an incredible, to write a commentary on the Mishnah, you have to already have read quite a bit. And this is an amazing, amazing piece of work. The Ivrit is not too difficult. And I think the translation is also available on Safaria for those who want to have a look at this and maybe print something to learn on Shavuot. But basically, what the Rambam says in his lengthy introduction to his commentary on the Mishnah is that the disciples of Hillel and Shammai, there was something that happened. And as the Gemara suggests, that they'd lost their Torah. And he says that this view is the view of fools. It's false. It's futile. It's not his words, it's my words, but he says that it's a deficit model to look at the idea that the descendants of Hillel and Shammai, Yochanan ben Zakkai is no small guy. If you Google the descendants and the intellectual students, the intellectual children of Hillel and Shammai, they're no small figure. In fact, I've got some Gemarot I can share later that are mind-blowing that actually talk about them being Mekablei HaShechina. That's no lazy guy. And he says here in his introduction to the Mishnah that basically that the truth is that the Chachamim had all of the accepted, they had the Masorah from Moshe, they hadn't lost it at all, and the halacha was maintained. And he basically says that, don't think that the students did something terrible. What I'd like to have a look at, so on the right-hand side, you can see there's a second section here. I'm just going to hover my mouse over the Zion. I'll just keep spinning that around. But I just want to read a little section from here. The first section I've just paraphrased, but it's worth going through a little bit later. So basically he says, אבל הטעם שהוא גורם להיות חולקים הוא מה שנזכר בתלמוד. שאחר מהם מוסר להשתמש בעם הארץ ושני מטר. Right? He says here that yes, Hillel and Shammai come to a different conclusion about a Machloket in Brachot on page 52. It's also worth going through. It's fascinating. In all those cases, Hillel and Shammai have completely different intellectual pathways that take them to the conclusions on about 4 or 5 different disputes. And he says there that, how is it possible that they thought so differently? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? He's saying it's actually natural. Inyan ze mevo'ar. שכל בית אנשים בהיותם שווים בשכל ובעניין ובדיות עיקרים שיוציאו מהם, הספרות לא תיפול ביניהם מחלוקת בספרתם בשום פנים. So he's saying here, when two people are equal in intellect, in in-depth knowledge and mastery of the ikarim, meaning they've mastered the 13 midot Torah nidreshet bahem, those hermeneutical principles, then there will be absolutely no intellectual dispute between them because they have taken the same intellectual journeys towards their answers. And he says that because of that reason, Hillel and Shammai, when they differed in ways that were actually of very minor consequence. Rambam saying this, not me. All right. Why was it that they were brilliant? Because they'd mastered these hermeneutical principles, they were able to arrive at pretty much the same decision because they'd traveled the same route, so to speak. Right? This can be attributed to the fact that their worldviews were very close and their views, if there were any differentiation, was minor. אבל כאשר רפתה שקידת התלמידים על החוכמה ונכשלה סברתם נגד סברת הלל ושמאי, ובם נפלה מחלוקת ביניהם בעיון על דברים רבים. Right? When their students slipped from their great intellectual heights and their understanding weakened and dispute between them became normative, what happened? They were striving for the same Torah, but their understanding of those intellectual pathways that took them there were different, and therefore they came to different conclusions, right? Hillel and Shammai's pathways were very similar. It sounds like one school failed and the other one didn't, but Rambam gets very cross at the idea that this should be regarded as a failure. He says diversity is hardwired into human nature, and to expect us to come out with a singular view of Judaism defies the way in which we were created. Ve'ein lahashami'an b'chol zot. The people who paskin differently and who engaged in Machloket are not to be blamed, he says. Shelo nachriach anachnu l'shnei chachamim mitvachkim be'iyun lehitvakeach kashe Yoshua uPinchas. Right? We're not expected, it's unfair to blame us to be like these two sages. We're not expected to be like the level of Yehoshua and Pinchas. Why he chose them, I have no idea, who had no safek. ואין לנו ספק כמו כן במה שנחלקו בו אחרי שאינם כמו שמאי והלל. Right? One cannot dismiss the opinions of the people who are arguing because they're not Shammai and Hillel. Right? He's basically saying Hashem doesn't want us to be Shammai and Hillel. He wants us to be, remember that classic story about Rav Zusha, that when he was dying, he was crying. Yes, I'm seeing a few nods, right? And people are saying, are you worried that you haven't attained the level of Moshe? And he's like, I'm not worried that I haven't attained the level of Moshe. I'm worried that I haven't attained the level of Zusha, right? It's my level. It's my literacy. It's my opportunities. Have I grasped all of the opportunities that I have that are part of my life? And the Rambam finishes in that section there, and he basically says that we are asked to tzivanu lishmoa michachmei hador kmo she'amar ela shofet asher yu bahem, right? So you need to lean to the chachamim of your day and not to mourn the fact that you weren't born in another era, right? Yigoel hadrachim ha'ele nafla ha'machloket lo mipnei sheta'u behilchot ve'sha'echad omer emet ve'asheni sheker. He's saying here that our Masorah is rock solid. The reason why people differed is not because one was saying sheker and the other one was saying yemet. And he basically says, if you look at this deeply enough, you will see this, that to, start bewailing Yeridat HaDorot is something that is a big mistake, which is a really amazing, it takes a Rambam to say something like that. So Rambam thinks we're in a strong position in terms of what we received at Har Sinai. The kashrut of Sinai is the kashrut of today, although our machines are different, right? The Shabbos that they had there in terms of the Lametet Melachot are the Lametet Melachot of us today. And when new questions come up, however, that we may not have received that halacha because the machinery wasn't there or something like that, but we take the same rules from Har Sinai, says Rambam, and we can apply those, and we are working now with the best that we can because that was the plan. And I guess one thing that is quite powerful about what Rambam suggests here is that this was part of his plan all along, that we do our best based on the level of our intellect, our understanding of the klalim, based on our brains and our spiritual understanding. Yes, Yeridat HaDorot, a lot of us don't have the opportunities perhaps of those who were sitting in the academies of Hillel and Shammai, that we are not expected to be there. And I guess in these disputes, Divrei Elohim Chaim, we receive this reassurance that if we are debating and we are doing this to the best of our ability, Divrei Elohim Chaim, that this is legitimate. But I guess I'm going to come back to that other question. How can we paskin today like Beit Hillel because they were nice? It just seems a little bit lame. None of us would go to the nice guy if it meant that we would lose out on money and we would lose out on skills. Like I said before, surely it's better to go to someone who's brilliant and a bit awful to talk to, who's going to get the job done, right? We know prime ministers and presidents, years ago, and I'm not going to get political and start talking about specific people, but there have been presidents and prime ministers who, when we found out that they weren't nice at all, their popularity increased. And that is a mind-blowing idea. But when it comes to Torah, we've got something quite powerful. The Bet Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, wrote in his Klalei HaTalmud that when it comes to secular knowledge, your midot are not important, right? You don't need to be a nice person to write good poetry, he says. You don't need to be patient to be a brilliant mathematician. But when it comes to Torah, says Rabbi Yosef Karo, since it's Da'at Elyon, since it's, the Torah HaKadosha, character is everything. And Rabbi Yosef Karo therefore explains that if they don't have good midot, they can't be trusted to be a Baal HaMasorah. And if someone is not able to faithfully transmit it, it's generally because there's something wrong with their midot. And that viewpoint's actually backed up by the Gemara in source number 11. Hahut surba mirab de baraban dahavu sine shomeha ame Reb Yehuda hachi la'avi shematei tzarich elei rabanan lo shamatei ka matchil shema de shamaya. Right, there was a certain Torah scholar who got a terrible reputation due to rumors about his personal conduct. And Rabbi Yehuda says, if we can't put him in cherem. The Chachamim need him. He's got a great mind. But at the same time, if we don't excommunicate him, it's a massive chilul Hashem. What do you do about the Talmid Chacham, who's vital in terms of what he holds in his head, but his heart is puerile? Amar lo la Rabbi Yehuda. Mimei shamay elei b'hai amra lo hache amar Rabbi Yochanan me'i dichtiv. And he goes on and says there that Rabbi Yochanan says as follows, that, and he quotes here from Malachi, that with the Kohen's lips, if the Kohen's lips keep knowledge and they seek Torah from his mouth, he is a malach. If people come to his mouth, he has to keep his lips clean. And the Gemara finishes off with Domeh laharava malach Hashem yivakshu Torah mipiv ve'im lav al yivakshu Torah mipiv. And basically his conclusion, he darshans on that pasuk in Malachi, and he says, if a teacher is similar to a malach of Hashem, you seek Torah from his mouth. But if he is not pure, don't seek Torah from his mouth. It might be information but it in some way has been tainted. And I guess, you know, if you, that's the reason why it seems that we paskin like Ben Hillel, if they were nice guys, it's not a trivial thing. If their midot were more refined, then the Torah that they embraced could be trusted more. It might not work with secular knowledge, but with Torah knowledge, that's definitely the case according to Rabbi Yosef Karo. And I guess, you know, when my glasses are a little bit dirty, I don't see so well through them. You know, if a camera is smudged, the photos aren't going to be perfect. And if a smudge on character is poor character traits, then we can understand why the Masorah might get smudged over time. Another idea as to why it is that we paskin according to Bet Hillel is offered by the Tosfot HaRid, Rabbeinu Yeshaya HaRishon of Terani. He was Italy, Germany, about the 13th century. And he basically, in his drush on the Eruvin Gemara that we looked at a little bit earlier, that idea that when Hillel spoke, he always put Shammai's words before him. He actually says there that it's just a great debating technique, that when you're preparing for a debate, the very skilled debater, before they actually look at their own arguments, they're actually going to immerse in the understanding of their opponent's arguments, which not only helps them rebut, but it helps them really understand their arguments even better. And that would make sense. If Shammai was only focusing on his views and Hillel was looking at Shammai and Hillel's views, then because his methods were so broad, it's most likely that his answers were also accurate. There is a lengthy piece of the Maharal that we won't have a chance to look at. I do recommend you go through. I will paraphrase the first section, where he basically says that there's a quote that he has. He calls the Talmidei Chachamim Ba'alei Ha'asufot, the custodians of assemblies, because he says that it's unavoidable that Chachamim that come together are going to dispute. He says that, you know, of course people see things differently, we have different perspectives, and also he says the Torah is so deep. He says even something that is tameh has something about it that is tahor. Something that is tahor has some aspect of it that's tameh, and therefore people are going to dispute with one another because the Torah is complex. And therefore you've got diverse people looking at a complex world, and the reason why he called them the Ba'alei Ha'asafot is because these people could come together, learn together, use and benefit from one another's different views to arrive at a superior understanding of the Torah. And if you look at the underlined section at the end, וכך הוא דיבר זה או דבר זה, שכל דבר יש לו בחינת מתחלפות שאין העולם פשוט. So it follows that in a diverse, complex, contradictory world where we are all created with such diversity as well, of course we're hardwired for Machloket, and that's the pathway to truth. So we look before it, the idea is this a fatal flaw or a breath of life? According to this view that is so supportive of Rambam, this view of the Maharal, certainly having this dispute is the pathway to a sharpened and a much clearer understanding of Torah. There's a beautiful story that I heard Rav Shechter tell in a shiur I was listening to a few years ago, where he was saying that Rav Soloveitchik had a Gemara group many years ago, and he learned Masechet Brachot with them for 10 years. And at the end of it, someone turned around and said, we would always have learned with you because you're Rav Soloveitchik, but we're just a little bit worried that because, Masechet Brachot is mostly D'Rabbanan, and so many of the views that we learned are not halacha l'maaseh today. Was it Bittul Torah? I mean, asking that of the Rav's a little bit, impetuous, but he actually said something really interesting. He said, if what you are learning, whether it is an accepted normative opinion or an opinion that gets raised and flattened straight away, if the person arrived at that opinion by applying the Shlosha Esrei Midot Shatorah Nidreshet Bahem to the best of their ability, not only is it Elu ve'elu Divrei Elohim Chaim, but Rav Soloveitchik called it Chefza Shel Torah, it still has legitimate Torah in it, and therefore, of course, it's not Bittul Torah. And anyone suggesting that learning with Rav Soloveitchik for 10 years will be Bittul Torah has an interesting imagination, but still, it was a very interesting point. There are some interesting ideas. The Netivot in his Hakdama to his Sefer says that, and it's kind of, again, it's humility, but it's wonderful. He says, if my Sefer is entirely wrong, it won't be Bittul Torah, because at least I'll enable you to understand the correct view a little bit better, because I'll give you some fallacy that you can react to and sharpen your own views well. So, you know, a bit of humility from the Netivot. The Kohelet Yaakov is another Sefer that, the whole Sefer offers 6 nafkaminas as to why it is that non-mainstream opinions are Divrei Elohim Chaim. It's a lengthy Sefer. I'm just going to take out 2 or 3 talking points from there that are really brilliant. One of them is that, you know, just because an opinion isn't practiced, it doesn't mean that it didn't actually get considered by the Sanhedrin. And in the Sanhedrin, there were people who actually voted for it. That already says that it's an important viewpoint. It can't be dismissed. You know, if we only read the normative viewpoints, our bookshelves would be very skinny and there wouldn't be that many books in it. I think that Daf Yomi, you'd be through the Gemara very quickly, as well as Mishnah, because most of the views that we break our heads on are the views we don't keep, which you only realize once you finish breaking your head on it. Another idea also that defends this idea of Divrei Elohim Chaim is that Masechet Beitza says that, you know, sometimes there's midat chasidut to be machmir on a da'at yachid. We know that Leil HaSeder, we're machmir to follow all of the deots. The Mishnah Berurah says sometimes that that's a good idea. And, you know, with we embrace Rav and Shmuel's opinions. We don't just start with mitchila of the Avadim Hayim, the Pharaoh b'Mitzrayim. We hurtle back even earlier in history. And we know that sometimes we do paskin like many de'ot. So Elu ve'elu is a very important thing. And another thing also, I'm going to skip the source in 13, but it's a fantastic series of arguments as to what happens to someone who actually follows Shammai. It's a hilarious Gemara. Someone followed, so Shema, you know, how you're supposed to position your body when you are davening. Shammai said, you lie down when you're saying Ma'ariv Shema, and when you're saying the Kriyat Shema of Shacharit, Uvkumecha, you stand up. And someone decided they were going to follow his opinion and was almost killed by highway robbers. And someone said, you deserve to die because you followed Shammai. You followed Shammai, right? Very harsh opinion. Rav Yecheskel says that if someone followed Shammai, someone followed Bet Shammai, it's fine. It's not in violation of halacha. And Rabbi Yosef in the same Gemara says that someone who follows Bet Shammai has to repeat it and do it according to Hillel because they haven't kept the mitzvot. So there's a machloket about these things, but it does actually seem that we are supposed to paskin like Hillel, but it doesn't mean Shammai is not true. It just means it's less true in some sense for the purpose of applicable or halacha l'maaser. The final idea, which is I think also quite powerful, that comes up in his Sefer, is the idea of the hora'at sha'ah. You know, there are normal circumstances. We all know that, you know, in the ideal world, there's minyan, there's Tikkun Leil Shavuot, and there's a whole bunch of things that we do under normal circumstances. And then there are weird circumstances. Present company and present circumstance is a perfect example. And the reason why he says it's so important to maintain the diversity of views and keep them close in our Masorah, and even if we don't practice them, to still be fluent with them, is he says that every once in a while, history throws us a curveball, and we need the minority opinions because sometimes we're going to actually need them for actual practical halacha, which is a pretty full-on idea. So we can see there that even the minority opinions are divrei Elohim Chaim. They serve their purposes, they're beautiful, they're legitimate, and therefore we hold on to them. Now, fascinating idea. To finish off with, the year that I came back from seminary, I remember saying to myself, I wanted to learn Rashi al HaTorah. So I turned up at Gold's, got myself a Rashi, and at the end of the year, you know, every day I did a little bit, I finished all Rashi al HaTorah, and I get to the final Rashi, right? Sefer Dvarim, Perek Lamed Daled, Pasuk Yud Bet, where, you know, Le'enei Kol Yisrael, and Rashi has what seemed to be the most bizarre Perush of all, which I guess is the cliffhanger that makes you go back and study the whole of Rashi again, very clever man, where basically he quotes a midrash that says, Shkoyach, Moshe Rabbeinu, says Hashem, you broke the luchot. Really? Shkoyach? Like, that's where Shkoyach comes from? And the amazing thing is that Hashem is saying something that gives us an opportunity to see the beauty in both of these perspectives. The fatal flaw and the breath of life. I gave them perfect luchot, said Hashem. You smashed them, so now they have to work, they have to strive. In the Aron, we are going to have two sets of luchot, the ones that are broken but perfect, and the ones that are perfect but broken. And together we have Masorah. So how do we reconcile these 2 points? And this is my final idea here. Who do we go with? The Geonim, who said that insufficient commitment to learning was the cause of forgetfulness? They're right. It's only if we invest in our learning that we'll be able to live it and love it in the present and pass it on with passion and dynamism and excitement to the future generations. But Rambam's also right, because he said our Masorah is strong and we're hardwired to see things differently. It's true. It is with our diversity and our different ways of thinking, albeit we need to try and work out a way of being respectful of those viewpoints, that'll enable us to come to deeper, more thoughtful and more true conclusions. Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chaim. We need the fatal flaw because that's us, but we need that breath of life to keep it powerful. To finish off, Reish Lakish was a brilliant sage in the time of the Gemara. His chavruta died, and they sent him off some brilliant young Iluyim to learn with him. And you're sitting with the Reish Lakish, so these Talmidim are sitting there and just agreeing with him the whole time. And eventually he said that classic line when he rejected yet another scholar who just sat there as a yes man, and he said, "Ten li chavruta u'ten li mituta." If I don't get the ultimate person to study with, I'm going to die. And I guess the idea is, yes, we need that learning. We need someone, we need people, we need communities, we need Batei Midrash where we can learn so that we can just with someone who is not us. So we can spar with them to better understand our views, to show our respect, to bring back the idea of Hillel and Shammai, and so that we can actually learn that Torah for ourselves and for the future. The Kotzker Rebbe once said, why is the Shavuot called Zman Matan Torah? Why wasn't it called Kabbalat Torah, the receiving of the Torah? And his answer was that the giving took place on one day, but the receiving takes place each and every subsequent day. I hope your Torah learning is sweet. I hope it involves a lot of argument. And I hope at the end, it's a breath of fresh air. Chag Sameach for tomorrow.
Shkoyach. Thank you so much for giving us the shiur.
Thank you.
Shkoy.
I'll hang around a bit if there's anyone who wants to ask any questions.
Thank you.
No worries. I've posted the comment if anyone would like a copy of the source sheet. It's in the comment box.
Thank you very much, Morabike.
No worries.
Thank you very much.
Take care of yourself.
Thank
See
you.
you. Bye, Tali.
Yeah.
See you.